If you are doing any photo editing or virtually staging any real estate photos using Google Gemini's AI, also known as Nano, you may have been shocked this week when they refused to let you do that. What's happened, Google has, without making any announcement whatsoever, changed their policy on what their limits are for what you can do with Nano. The problem is that being unspecified, it's also somewhat ambiguous. In fact, they're not specifying what those limits are, and they're going to be throttling all users. This happened to me this week when I was playing around with some selfies, when all of a sudden I get this message from Nano. I can't create more images for you today, but I can still find images from the web. I thought that was a fluke, and so I thought, well, I'm just asking for some changes. Let me go do some other work. I'll come back to it. So then I said, well, can you please try again? And the reply I got was, I understand. You'd like me to try again, but unfortunately, I've reached my image limit. For now, I'm unable to create new images at this moment. So curious, I'm thinking, well, what is that image limit? So I asked, well, what is your image limit? To which Nano replied, I don't have a fixed limit, and gave me a vague list of things like server load, prompt complexity, and usage history. So at first I'm thinking, well, maybe this is because I'm using the free version of Nano and I'm not paying for anything. So I said, well, what about for paid plans? Which got me an even more convoluted answer that still didn't define any set limits, and instead just spoke in generalities of highest access or expanded access. The Verge reported on this and noted that Gemini and Google Labs Vice President Josh Woodward posted on X that they had to use temporary limits to manage peak time. So I went over to Gemini's Help Center and looked up their limits policy to see what changed, but that was just as obscure and wouldn't commit to any kind of image limit, saying in fact that this could depend on capacity and would be basically throttled for all plans, paid plans included. So at this point, I was like highly confused. It's like, well, I did like using Nano, especially for creating some of my YouTube content B-roll. I wouldn't really count on it necessarily for doing any virtual staging or editing, and I have another video that covers that, and also people trying to use ChatGPT for that, and I have a link down in the description of this video on that particular video. But even if you were to use this, this isn't something we'd expect out of Google. This is something we're used to seeing out of Zillow, because Zillow would change their mind all the time. But even Zillow would also have things described. They'd specify limits, costs, things like that. With Google Gemini just saying, well, even if you paid me $20 a month or even more, I can't guarantee that you're going to be able to actually do your work today, and maybe you'll just have to wait until you get some downtime on our servers because our servers are busy just trying to satisfy everybody. Well, needless to say, I was very disappointed. Disappointed in Google, disappointed in how this went. And I understand it's free, they can pull it. And I really wasn't counting on using this for my business anyways. If I want to do virtual staging, you've seen me do this in other videos before, I recommend applydesign.io. No, this isn't a pitch for Apply Design. It's just a $7 fee that you pay to upload an image. You can edit it as many times as you want, render it as many times as you want, and you get a real virtually staged image. What's happened recently, though, is a lot of realtors have been trying to use ChatGPT or this Nano to get by with virtually staging items. And yeah, you're not going to get repeatability. Yes, it will change the structure and things like that I point out in this other video that actually make it unsafe to use these generative AI engines to completely virtually stage stuff for you automatically. But besides using just like applydesign.io instead of ChatGPT or Nano, you are pretty safe if you do need to use AI by using Adobe software. You can use Firefly for complete image generation. Of course, that's just one of the engines that's used inside of Photoshop. And I have another video that covers that as well. There's another link down in the description for this video covering that, because there's different types of AI doing different things, and some of them now won't cost you any generative credits. So unlike what's going on with Nano, and I can see ChatGPT starting to follow suit on this eventually too, Well, using the Adobe products, you're really safe, and you also know exactly what it's going to cost you. And in a lot of cases now, it won't cost you anything extra because they've dropped generative credits from a lot of the remove tools that are inside of Photoshop that are covered in that other video. Now, granted, yes, Adobe has changed some of their policies when it comes to AI, but some of that's also been for the better, first off. Second off, they announced it. They let everybody know what was going to be changing. Nano Banana, Google's Gemini AI, is an awesome tool, even though it does produce low-resolution images. Eventually, I'm sure that will change, especially if you have a paid plan, and if they can commit to how many images you can generate off that paid plan. But when it comes to real estate photography, realism rules, and that's a requirement because of truth in advertising laws. So using this as a tool to begin with really isn't safe. So if you as a photographer, if you're relying on ChatGPT or Google Gemini AI to do your editing, well, shame on you, this is what's going to happen. What I do recommend, though, is when you hear your clients talk about that, to use this as a talking point. A prime example of how, at a whim, they can change their policies on this. Also, as I point out in those other videos, is you can't rely on it because it can completely change the structure, views outside, things like that, that would be against most listing site requirements like your local MLS. Now, I'm not anti-AI. As you've probably seen with a lot of recent videos, I actually use AI for a lot of my workflow. The thing is if you're going to be building any business, you have to have reliable tools and you have to have reliable vendors. Something like Nano Banana and even ChatGPT, those things can change on the fly. And there's no guarantee of what that's going to be. That's why I like to use Adobe so much. But either way, things are changing fast. That's just the nature of technology in itself, and more so now that AI has been introduced so much into our lives and in so many other facets of work over just even the last year. Things will change over time, but as they do, I will stay on top of it, and I will keep you posted.